UFC 253 will be headlined by the two best middleweights on the planet today, Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa. To say this is the most anticipated middleweight fight in quite some time would be a huge understatement. Two undefeated fighters, two absolute killers facing each other for a chance to be called the king of the middleweights. For the first time since 2009, two undefeated fighters will be fighting for a title. And what a fight it's going to be. Two fighters whose bread and butter is striking, but at the opposite ends of the spectrum. In this video, we'll take a look at both fighters and how they match up against one another. Before we get into each fighter's styles, let's take a quick look at the tail of the tape. Adesanya is 6'4", which is 3 inches taller than Costa's 6'1". Adesanya also has a crazy 80-inch reach, which is 8 inches longer than Costa's 72 inches. Adesanya has a 74% finish rate, and Costa has a ridiculous finish rate at 92%. Let's take a quick look at both fighters and the style they choose to implement inside the octagon. Israel Adesanya's fight style is pretty straightforward. He's a deadly and precise striker. Due to his lanky stature, above average reach, and his kickboxing pedigree, he's one of the best strikers in UFC history. Rather than leaning on power, Adesanya strives for precision. He's a sniper that looks for the perfect opening to land jabs, hooks, and straights at range. Combo that with his incredible footwork and head movement, it's easy to see why he's still undefeated and at the top of the middleweight food chain. Paulo Costa, on the other hand, could not be more different. Built like a Greek god, Costa relies heavily on his raw power to finish. That power in itself is deadly, but what makes Costa so dangerous is the constant, unrelenting pressure he puts on his opponents. In his 5 fights in the UFC, he's accumulated a significant strike per minute count of 8.43, an output better than anyone else in UFC history. If you want to see a more detailed breakdown of both fighters, check the links in the description below. Now, let's take a look at how these guys match up against one another. First, let's take a look at grappling and jiu-jitsu. There's not much to talk about in this department. Neither fighter uses submissions or groundwork as their primary tool. Adesanya rarely uses his ground game or submissions. It will be highly unlikely that he'll try this against a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt like Costa. Although Costa does have one submission win to his name, it was more of a situational submission rather than his actual game plan. In fact, officially, he has never even attempted a takedown or submission in the UFC and prefers to use his grappling pedigree to keep the fight standing. Even if he does try to in this fight, Adesanya has the second highest takedown defense in UFC middleweight history at 86.5% to contest that. We think that it's a pretty safe bet that this fight will be contested on the feet. Now, let's move on to the clinch. Both fighters do excellent work in the clinch, but in different manners. Costa does his best clinch work up against the cage. Using his sheer power, Costa is able to hold his opponents up against the cage, clinch, and land brutal body strikes. Costa's aim is to push his opponent to the cage with his constant forward pressure to make up for his lack in reach, and he will likely do the same against Adesanya to nullify his 8-inch reach disadvantage. On the other hand, Adesanya does his best work in the middle of the octagon at range. When Izzy goes for the clinch, he methodically lands a couple strikes such as knees up the middle or hooks before quickly disengaging from his opponent. Although Adesanya does not excel in the clinch, due to his reach advantage over Costa, he will have an easier time staying at range and picking his moments. Finally, let's talk about the stand-up. Whether this fight is a quick finish or a 5-round war, it's blatantly obvious that it will be a striking clinic. Both fighters have built their professional MMA careers on striking. This matchup is every fan's dream, a top-tier counter-striker against a top-tier pressure fighter. At first glance, it may seem that Adesanya has a clear advantage in this category. He's a counter-striker, so he can just move and slowly pick apart Costa, right? Well, it's not that simple. Although Adesanya has been in the cage with some absolute killers like Romero and Whitaker, he has never faced someone quite like Paulo Costa in MMA. In the title unification fight, Whitaker applied pressure on Adesanya, but in quick spurts, allowing Israel to implement his game and time his shots. He won't get this kind of time or space from Costa. In all of Costa's fights, he continuously applies pressure. He won't give Israel any time to think or breathe. He'll constantly move forward and land at a rate never before seen in the UFC. Now, partner that with Costa's 57.8% significant strike accuracy, you can see why most men crumble in the octagon against him. Another one of Costa's strengths is his tendency to go for body shot. Unlike a lot of Israel's previous opponents, Costa won't strictly be headhunting and knows how to switch it up. A key part of his game is to walk you to the cage and land heavy blows to the body, which eventually gives him the opening to send your head to the moon. This type of strategy is something we have not seen be used against Israel, and can be exactly what the Eraser needs to dethrone the champ. Now, let's take a look at some of Adesanya's strengths in this fight. Simply put, experience and endurance. In his career, he has over 100 fights combined in MMA and kickboxing. He has the UFC middleweight record for longest fight time at just under 16 minutes per fight. He's been in a Fight of the Year war with Kelvin Gastelum, where he looked in peak physical shape in the 5th round. In Costa's only decision win, we saw him fade a little bit in the 3rd round against Romero, the only round he lost in the fight. If Izzy keeps up this pace for a long period of time, it may give him the upper hand in the championship rounds. That is, if the fight even gets there. Adesanya needs to control the pace to his liking and not allow Costa to control the cage with his pressure, which is far easier said than done. After 8 fights in the UFC, one thing is for certain: Israel's striking is masterclass. His timing, his placement, his fight IQ is off the charts. The only time we've seen Costa dropped in the UFC is against Uriah Hall, another tall and rangy fighter. Now, Uriah Hall is a great fighter, but Israel is much faster and his strikes are much crisper. Not to mention, his significant strike defense is at 65.5%, which is the 2nd highest in middleweight history. If Adesanya can utilize the footwork and head movement that we've seen in his fights, he'll be able to capitalize on one of Costa's weaknesses. Due to his reach, Costa tends to lunge and extend his punches, leaving him open to counter straights and jabs, which is coincidentally Adesanya's bread and butter. He's never fought someone as quick as Izzy, and this will be the decisive factor in this fight. On the other side, Adesanya's toughest fight to date was against Gastelum, who fought Israel with constant pressure and power to try and overcome his height and reach differences. Although he came up short, he had his moments and had Adesanya badly hurt at times. If Costa can employ similar tactics in an amplified manner, it could be a long night for Israel. This is what makes this fight so intriguing. Costa's overwhelming pressure, volume, and power is the perfect way to counter a counter-striker like Adesanya. But Adesanya's footwork, head movement, and precision is the perfect way to counter a pressure fighter like Costa. It's a cliche, but whichever fighter can implement his game plan better will have a significant advantage. The wait is nearly over. After over a year of waiting and build-up, we will finally be able to see the last stylebender and the eraser meet inside the octagon and duke it out. The unstoppable force meets the immovable object. Regardless of who wins on the 26th, the real winners will be the fans. Thanks for watching our video. If you liked it, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share with all your friends.